Philanthropists and tech entrepreneurs in recent years have been increasingly seeking conveniently self-serving ways to lift up the less fortunate of the world. My next guest has taken a close look at the phenomenon. Anand Giridharadas is a contributor for The Atlantic and The New Yorker, among others. His new book is Winners Take All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World. In it, he explores what he calls market world, the paradigm of a modern gilded age in which privileged classes work for social change, but only in ways that allow them to profit from the status quo. Anand, thanks so much for being with us. Let's start with the whole idea of the win-win when someone, say, creates a budget-stretching app instead of putting their energy towards fighting for higher wages. Explain what you found as the rationale for that.
In the United States right now, we live in an age of extraordinary generosity. There are seemingly endless initiatives by rich and powerful people to do good, whether it's an app like the kind you mentioned, whether it's philanthropic giving and signing the Giving Pledge, whether it's young people wanting to start social enterprises or move to Africa after college to help out and give back. But as many of your viewers will know, that coincides with the most callous age in the United States for middle and working class people in 100 years, an age that has generated anger, that has given rise in part to Donald Trump, who in turn is tearing up the world order. So the question is, how is it that such generosity has been allowed to coincide with such callousness? And what I started to find as I reported this book and spent time in the inner sanctums of this new Gilded Age in America is that these wealthy do-gooders believe in what you correctly call the win-win. They believe that they can change the world in ways that allow them to stay on top and that the system atop which they stand must go on, and the system that shuts other people out. They believe in making a difference in ways that protects their ability to make a killing, and giving in ways that protects their ability to keep on taking.
It's almost as if, in the book you read, it's as if even the idealistic among us have sort of internalized 4 or 5 decades of libertarian neoliberal thought. Where has all that left the American worker today?
The United States, the people of the United States have been on the receiving end of a decades-long campaign to other government, to turn government into an almost foreign entity coming to take your guns, take your money, take your liberties. And so, the way that many people in Europe, for example, understand government, which is a flawed, imperfect, often inefficient, but fundamentally, noble tool that tries to arrange for some kind of common standard of living and to police the rules of the road. That doesn't exist here anymore, that view, because that view has been under assault by essentially business interests who wanted to convince most Americans that government was their enemy. And what you have at the end of that, so first business interests in phase 1 eradicated the idea of an activist government that solved problems. Then, as that government has been underfunded and been less able to solve public problems, those wealthy business interests step in and say, "Oh, look, the government is so ineffective, so incapable of solving problems. Let us step in and solve them. And of course, we'll solve them in our way, and we'll veto any methods of solving them that, of course, are not congenial to our interests, such as raising taxes or regulating things. We'll solve them through win-wins that basically mean social change gives us a kickback."
All right, you take a close look at the tech industry in particular in this book. Facebook and Google, clearly world-changing tools that have brought people together. It's become pretty clear in recent times they're not always a force for good. They seem to be doing just about everything they can to avoid public oversight. What do you think can be done about that sort of thing?
I mean, I think, in many ways, Europe has taken a healthier view of these tech companies. I don't think there's been antitrust issues against them and fines levied against them for their business practices. I don't think anybody in Europe suggests that those tools shouldn't exist or shouldn't have been invented or shouldn't be used. I don't think Google or Facebook or any of these tools has been banned in Europe. But I think there's a view in Europe that those companies, being the most powerful companies of our time, should pay their taxes, should obey laws of competition, and are tools that should be used to make life better and to make human beings flourish. And to the extent that they don't, should be brought into line. Well, here in the United States, those companies have succeeded in making us think that they are rebels up against the man. They are, renegades going up against the establishment. And what that has done is allowed them to slip under the radar of regulation. They are barely regulated. In many cases, they are de facto monopolies that are not subject to any kind of competition scrutiny the way you have in Europe. And frankly, we've come to a place where a company like Facebook can allow the U.S. election to be compromised, can deal with media outlets in a way that makes it very hard for them to make money anymore. And then with the profit caused by that kind of behavior, can turn around and Mark Zuckerberg can say, I'm going to give my fortune away, but in the course of giving it away, I'm going to assert quite a bit of power over this society by fixing education, fixing homelessness, fixing, getting rid of all the diseases. And so you have this extreme taking followed by this extreme giving. And what suffers on both ends is democracy.
Well, a big part of this that people tend to overlook sometimes is what do you think is the responsibility of center-left parties in America and Europe who have sort of perhaps allowed this situation to come about? And do you see any sort of cracks in that? We see some interesting developments in Democratic primaries in the States, for one thing, lately. Do you think something is changing there?
Cynthia Nixon, who's running for governor in New York, has this great line that we don't just need more Democrats in power, we need better Democrats in power. And I think one of the undercurrents of the reporting that I did is that you cannot, clearly the political right in America has waged this anti-government revolution for 3 or 4 decades. But you cannot understand their success without understanding the weakness that they encountered on the other side. And yes, they have pulled off all manner of tricks. They've appealed to racism. They've done any number of things that made it easier for them to pull off that anti-government revolution. But the reality is the Democratic Party in the United States, and I think you'd find perhaps some analogs in other parts of the world, has been rather ineffective at pushing a message of policies that are actually beneficial to the vast majority of Americans. Given the dynamics of inequality, given the dynamics of a 1% in this country that corners a quarter of the nation's income, that is, a 10% that is basically the only people to have recovered from the Great Recession a decade ago. Given those dynamics, that would be a very favorable climate, you would think, for a vigorous left. But the Democratic Party, I think, has failed under the current leadership of Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, perhaps, but not just under them, to speak to all kinds of people of all backgrounds, discombobulated by an era of globalization, automation, the internet, transformation socially, and of extreme inequality. And I think part of getting beyond the era of Donald Trump is not just impeaching Donald Trump or investigating Donald Trump or simply removing Donald Trump from office, but actually trying to eradicate the 3 or 4 decades of conditions that made a system failure on the scale of Donald Trump possible.
Indeed. Well, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much. Anand Giridharadas is the author of Winners Take All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World. It's out now. It's a great read. I recommend it to Lana.
Thank you very much for that. Brian Quinn there with the day's business news. Fascinating interview there. We're going to take a short break. Stay with us. This is France 24.